If you decide to become a professional writer and make your living by doing this, then up front, you know, there's going to be a lot of compromises you're going to have to make along the way. There will be articles and stories and whatever that are going to get into print that you won't be completely satisfied with, but there are deadlines. There are alternate choices. C.P. Snow, the British novelist, you write on weekends, and you stay with a thing until you are satisfied that it is polished, that it's as good as it's likely to get, ever. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, and I suspect it's a matter of temperament what you choose. For myself, I tried a lot of things before settling down for writing. I mentioned acting. Then I decided that I would be a writer, but of the weekend variety for a while. So I tried, teaching. I was a sailor, a truck driver, an insurance investigator. That is like something out of crime fiction, but I really did it for a while. I even tried being a bum for the summer, hitchhiking around the country. I was a movie extra, a salesman. I don't really remember. There was just a whole lot of jobs I had. And they were all unsatisfying in some way. Teaching came closest to being satisfying, but in teaching, well, if I could have just got in front of a classroom every day and told the kids what I know, that would have been fine, but I had to deal with a school system which was medieval in its concept, that, you know, the kind of school system that's oriented more toward perpetuating a school system than imparting knowledge to X number of pupils. So finally I decided that there's only one way you can go, and that's writing. You know, and I went into it pretty realistically, knowing that there were going to be unpleasant times. I went into it first as a crime reporter, and when I went freelance, which is a big decision for anybody to make ever in their lives, you know, like to throw away the security of an organization and decide to make it on your own. I figured that, you know, I would have to do some pretty damn dull jobs in order to make a living. I have had to. I've done ghostwriting, and I've done things like sales presentations for large corporations, and last weekend I did an advertising job, and it's horribly dull work. You feel like an 8th Avenue prostitute, but it's necessary to pay the rent, and in compensation, 1 out of every 5 jobs that I do excites me to the point where I squirm. I'm really happy with my work. I don't think there are very many people in our industrial civilization that are really joyous about what they do for money 20% of the time. And a good 70% of the time I don't object to it. So I'm willing to give the world and economic necessity 30% of my time. And that buys the happiness I get from the rest of it. And it buys me a lot of other things, too. Like, how many people do you know that can work their own hours, choose when they will work? I write from about 10 at night till 3 or 4 in the morning. That happens to be the span of time in which I work best. But there's no straight job I could possibly have that they would let me come to work at 10 at night. That sounds like a small thing, but it's not. Because medical researchers have proven that there are 2 different kinds of metabolisms. I think it's called the circadian system, though I'm not sure about that pronunciation. Well, you know, there are some cats that jump out of bed in the morning singing and smiling, and they run to work, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're zombies. Other people that have a very slow start, and by quitting time, they're going great guns. The advantage of being freelance is that I can choose to start when I'm going great guns and work at optimum capacity for the length of my work day. And I don't get ulcers. that way. I'm not ever fighting my own body. Almost everybody who has a 9-to-5 job does fight their own body. Other than that, I never get caught in rush hour frustrations. I'm never on a crowded subway or driving my car through heavy traffic, because being freelance, I can pick and choose the times I'll go places. So there are, I could be making more money, probably about twice as much, doing advertising. Judging by the job I did last weekend, I made $300 in about 3 hours. But if I did advertising all the time, I'd have ulcers. I started as a comic book writer as a lark. I was going to do it for 6 months, pay some bills with it, and have great stories to tell about my weird involvement with this bywater of literature. And I'm still doing it now. It's almost 6 years later, because I have become involved in it. I might as well admit that to you and to myself as an art form. Involved with it enough so that I've worked at it hard. Enough so that 1 out of every 5 of my stories is good. And 4 out of 5 are, competent. And then that 5th one, well, we don't even talk about that. But, yeah, so possibly when I wrote the thing that you're talking about, that may have been several years ago when, I was still looking upon it as a gig rather than something I was involved with. I guess I've been involved with it deeply only since I've been working with Neil, because only since I've been working with Neil have I been able to know that I would get the pictures that I needed to tell a given story. For example, there is no other artist in the world that I would depend upon to draw a crucial point in the story depended on somebody's expression. With Neil, I would simply state in the picture description, this is what's needed, and be confident that he'd give it. With anybody else, I'd add a caption to tell you, the reader, what is going on in the character's head. By adding the caption, I vitiate the impact of the picture somewhat, but I would have to take out that insurance. With Adams, I know that he'll get the expression right. I know that if it takes him a solid day to draw that one picture, he'll do it, and it'll work. So he has, in a very real way, shown me possibilities in the comic medium that I didn't suspect existed, even when I was doing pretty well with it, even when I was placing high in the fan polls and so forth. Yeah. I was perennially the 3rd man for about 3 years. And
was that the Roy Thomas and Stanley?
Yeah, right.
Who was that, I think it was Phil Sony mentioned it at the New York Con, about how, I remember this from Green Lantern, when he got shot by the arrow, and his expression on his face, and then there was that sequence with, about how nobody was helping him and all that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, that's a sequence with virtually no copy until the last panel. And I think it really works. I think that I've gone back to those particular couple of pages a number of times myself, because I think what Neil did with the pictures was sort of express urban despair, and in a very, very powerful way, all through visuals. I wouldn't, had I written that sequence for any other artist, I would have done it with captions. With Neil, I sort of figured that why should I clutter up his beautiful pictures with my words? And I think it comes off, I think that's the strongest thing in that book. And I think that 2-page sequence makes the statement that we're trying to make with, all, I don't know, whatever it is, 50 pages of that story in 2 parts. that we are living in a big, hostile, uncaring, and often vicious world. That's why people go to drugs. At the same time, we tried to make a plea for strength. We tried, in Green Arrow's dialogue, to tell kids, look, you got to be strong. Don't cop out on yourself. But, we both thought very carefully about the placement of that sequence, which is very up near the front, and it's sort of like the overture to a symphony. It tells you what the story is going to be about. My deal with National, when I agreed to take over this book, is, I asked for some concessions. I had been offered books before that I've refused. This time around, I kind of wanted to do, I don't object to doing Wonder Woman, but I wanted some concessions like a Jeff Jones cover, and in exchange for that, what they got was my promise to do the first 4 scripts myself. I don't think it's a good situation for a writer to be the editor of his own stuff, but they evidently think I'm not going to botch it, and I'll try and justify their faith. But I don't have to worry about story conferences. I sit down at a typewriter at home and decide what kind of story I want to write, and then put it down. With the first story, I let a week elapse. I took it international and shoved it in a desk drawer, and didn't think about it for a week. Then went back and copy edited it to get at least some vague notion, distance between the writing and the editing. I would feel more comfortable if I were editing a writer I trust on that book or on any other. I don't have that option, and I frankly don't know right now which editor or which writer I'd assign it to. It would have to be somebody who could do both Gothic and action.
Well, are you going to give it over to another writer after 4 issues?
Very possibly. Well, let's put it like this. If it lasts 4 issues, the book is in trouble now, like most of my subjects, when I take them over. If after 4 issues I begin, the book is solid enough in sales, and I see or think of a writer that I think can do it, sure, I'll be delighted to hand it over. I have a couple of people, I'm not going to mention names, but a few people that I think might be able to do it. I even want to go outside. I want to get, people who are straight science fiction writers and see if possibly they can do it.
Well, Barry, something you said earlier, I don't know what, we might have, Marty told me, when I wrote...
Ariel Wing, you're 16, kid.
Told me, I think he thought I'd be interested in something. How he submitted our scripts to a source, and that's how Gary and Marvin all got in. Whenever you try something like that, what form is the best to use? I mean, what did you submit? I want to do it.
If you want to break into writing
We're
copies?
going to have to submit several times, I'm sure, but I would have said, what would be the best form?
There's no rule. There's a guy named Elliot Magan who sent us in a Green Arrow script over the transom, unsolicited, unprepared for, that we bought. It was so good that we split, that'll be the next issue after the drug issue. We split the book into 2 parts. I did a 13-page Green Lantern story around a Neil Adams cover, which shows a black guy wearing the Green Lantern uniform and the ring, standing over our beloved Hal Jordan, saying in effect, watch out, you bastards, I'm going to get even now. And if you have a power ring, you sure can get even, right? So I did a story around that, and we used Elliot's 13-page Green Arrow story for the rest of it.
I didn't mean...
Normally, I would suggest that you submit a plot synopsis first.
That's what I wanted to know.
A tight plot synopsis, maybe 2 pages single space.
I can't write in that hand. I never have. I always try.
But, well, I don't always do plot synopses now, but until 6 months ago I did. It's a good policy anyway to know where you're going with a story. My one requirement when I begin to write a comic book story or any other kind of thing is I got to know where it's going. I got to know how it's going to end. I don't always know how it's going to get there. But hell, there's plenty of literary precedent for that. The way Joyce Carey wrote novels was to write what he considered the three big scenes, and then to go and make them hang together, just fill in the rest of the stuff. So, yeah, to answer your question, write plot synopses. Think of a strong story. And be commercial, man. Don't try and be creative the first few times out. Even after that. Think of a story with a death trap and a clever escape and 3 fights and a macabre villain. That's what they'll buy. They don't trust you as a writer until you've done 80 scripts and they know whether or not you can write. So the way to hook an editor is to give him such a damn strong story in traditional terms that he'll buy it for the plot, even if he has to have somebody else rewrite it.
Where's Martin submitted?
Hmm?
Marty. Do you know anything about his submission?
I don't.
Marty who?
Pascal.
I know who he is. A fine fanzine editor, I don't know.
But one more thing, and then I said let you you said you paid over 20.
Yeah, well, let me elaborate on that last.
Try it.
Children, please. The thing I said about being entertaining much earlier in this, you're going to be entertaining if you get somebody in a terrible jam and get them out of it in a clever way. I mean, you're going to intrigue the reader. You're going to engage him on a couple of levels. And that's what I call insurance. When I'm doing a Batman script, if I don't have any original ideas at all, I'm pretty sure I can put Batman in a miserable, rotten situation and get him out of it. And that'll get the story through. If nothing else, you've got that. Pray God, you usually have something else in addition to it. But, well, it's that thing I was talking about before. Being a professional writer, I got to do 50 things a year. Therefore, I got to have death traps.
You told me, I say, you didn't tell me, but you said, if you paid over $20, you'd use my name in the next Superman story.
And I will. I won't use it in the next Superman. I'm going to begin scripting a Batman tomorrow.
Batman. I want it to be those.
I can't guarantee because I don't know what the story's going to be right now. But it'll be there. I'll even put you on stage.
Or you can just have me raise my hand with a halo.
Can I ask a question about editors? Because I'm getting interested in that. Like Dick Giordano, there was a big, significant change when he took over.
Yeah. Giordano's a genius as an editor, and I'm sorry to see that he quit doing it.
What about
What's your name with the correct spelling? It was a bit about a runaway asteroid that Green Lantern gets with his ring, and it becomes our moon. It's not too solid scientifically, but it was a shtick that impressed him. And since then, he's been willing to trust people if he knows generally what the story is going to be about. And you go in and you talk with him for an hour. I find those conferences enormously useful because he'll come up with ideas. He'll come up with usable bits. Lately, he's been coming up with characterization things, not just death trap physical interesting gimmicks, but personality shticks that you can use. So I find Julie an enormously good editor. He encourages, he helps, and he doesn't stick his own ego between the writer and artist and the work. Unlike many editors that I've worked with and some that she's worked with, he does just exactly what an editor should do. He helps you when you need helping, and he keeps, keeps you straight, keeps you from digressing, make sure you don't look like a fool because of bad grammar, bad spelling. He's an enormously good editor. Giordano was a genius because he didn't even have to do that. He would just sort of talk to you for half an hour, and you weren't even sure you were talking about the story. And somehow, through his rap, the whole thing got gelled in your mind, and you knew exactly what you were going to write when you went home. I think it's a major loss to not to you, to comic books that Giordano has stopped editing. I just thought he was enormously good.
Now, one other thing I wanted to get.
Ted White is also very good at it.
Just sort of a side note.
You've never changed a word of my copy, therefore...
Oh, I've changed the spelling.
You would have to bring that up, wouldn't you?
You've formerly, like, politics and religion were taboo. And, like, it's obvious, like, you know, the Spiral Agnew issue.
That was spiritual.
Yeah,
Funny,
Are you gonna, have you ever thought about doing anything on religion? I mean, like, there's a thing with...
Well, you should ask. 2 Green Lanterns from now, it's going to be about Christ.
why don't you go down?
We have a crucifixion. We have a guy who is a Christ figure, and it's spelled out as much as we can spell it out. And he gets crucified on the tail assembly of an SST. It's an ecology story. And it was a case where Adams came up with a cover and said, this deserves a story. And when I looked at it, I agreed. So I did. We're going to get into religion. I'm beginning to find fewer and fewer taboos as we go along. I mean, face it, that thing about Spiro is pretty vicious.
Yeah.
It's pretty heavy stuff.
We had a sparrow over time, thought you had it.
That was the subject of my keynote speech this morning.
He was talking to me yesterday.
And not only did the Kinney Corporation pass it, they advertised it. They sent out flyers about it.
Oh, really?
And I have an idea, if I can get away with that story, I can get away with anything politically. We're not going to get away with pornography. But we don't have to. You don't have the ego goal of reaching 15 million readers a year. That's a very important thing for me as a writer, to have an audience. I don't think I would be able to write something that I didn't think would get published somewhere. I need an audience. One of the big gratifications of doing comics is I have a huge audience. Really huge. 15 million people a year I reach, easily.
15 million?
Sure, counting reprints.
Well, you mean...
Every one of my stories is translated into Spanish and German, and is reprinted in English in Australia and Britain.
Are they done in Italy, too?
Yeah, oh, right. Italy is a very big market for it. And you think that doesn't give me a charge? I mean, there are going to be 15 million people reading this word, I think, as I type it.
For a reasonable variation.
Yeah, right.
How about how many people read the stories eventually reach?
Yeah, easy.
You know,
I would say probably, closer to 25 million, eventually, counting reprints. And what's the circulation of Amazing and Fantastic? I don't like violence a whole lot myself, possibly because I'm skinny. I don't know. But I think it's morally incumbent upon somebody who deals with violence as much as I do to indicate that if there were any other way to do this, you should do it another way. I have a war story I want to write about a kid who comes back from Vietnam, a basket case, missing all 4 limbs, because some colonel wanted to make general and so sends him into a hopeless battle situation to make his record look good. I can't do it right now. Maybe within a year I can, with the liberalization of the code. I would like to begin to really start doing strong anti-violence stories, but until then, I can work in the captions, maybe, to say that this is really bad. In fact, this is a failure on our hero's part. If our hero was really all he should be, it wouldn't be necessary to punch this guy out. It is. But, well, I have two kinds of dealings with paperback library. When I'm doing my comic books, I'm dealing with them in my identity as a writer for National. I have had dealings with them outside, in which I deal, you know, the relationship is a freelance writer, anybody who comes in off the street wouldn't have it any other way, really. It keeps things a lot less hassly and a lot less confused if you keep your identities separate like that. I've done straight fiction, and I've done a book of nonfiction and a lot of reportage and newspaper work, and I've written a movie script, and I've written plays, and comic book scripting is a very peculiar little corner of craftsmanship all its own. There are lots of things you have to keep in mind. You know, to pick an obvious example, you can't have so many words in a panel so that the characters are sort of peeking out from the balloons. That's generally the mistake that a beginning writer in this field makes. There are matters of pacing. There are matters of composing your pages, which is not, well, obviously it's not true if you're writing straight fiction because you don't know what the typesetter will do with it. But it gives you an extra tool because you do have control over what goes on what page when you're writing comic books. If you're really a good comic book scripter, you learn to use that tool, like everything else. You learn to compose your pages so that your last panel is the strongest, say. Or so that your last panel isn't the strongest, but it leads them to think something's going to happen in the first panel of the next page that doesn't. So you have that little jolt of surprise, and you know, you have 50 little jolts of surprise, and you have a superb story. You pay attention to those little tiny things.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
This is a question that's aroused my curiosity for a long time. When you're writing a script, and you're starting cold, you're not working with a penciling from an artist, right? You're just starting.
Depends on which company you're working.
Yeah, but for the most part, you're starting with a sheet of paper and your typewriter, right?
Yeah.
Right. Now, when you start, can you visualize in your head the number of panels on the page, what's going to take place on all that? In other words, do you set that all up in advance, or do you just sit down and start writing at your typewriter?
I know, well, when I first started doing this work, I made outlines on little yellow paper about what had to happen on every page, 1, 2, 3, you know, and up to 22. Now, some 450 scripts later, I do that in my head. But you got to do it, yeah. It's why an awful lot of good writers, good science fiction writers or whatever, blow it when they try comic books. They don't have the capacity to visualize. They think linearly, and you have to think visually. I've talked to people about this kind of incredible symbiotic thing that happens between Neil and I, where I would say 90% of the time what I visualize while I'm writing the script is what comes out when he pencils it. And, well, here's, may I borrow this that you say, you know, my picture descriptions are very sketchy. Very little detail, and yet Neil and I, you know, on some subconscious level, must think exactly alike. You know,
You ought to take a telepathy test.
yeah, we ought to. We disagree superficially about much. Our politics are both pretty different, for example, but when it comes to putting together comic book stories, it's almost unbelievable. It's almost spooky. He draws exactly what I've seen in my imagination. Anyway, to answer your question, yeah, you gotta see it.
Yeah.
Children of Doom was written, which I think is much the best thing I did at Charlton. That was written with a different artist in mind. In fact, boy, that was about the last person I figured would do it. And he did it, and I think it's his best job, easily. It was a case of an artist getting turned on by a script. In that case, it has. In other cases, I've looked at a job on which I've lavished some skill and love with an artist in mind, and it was given to somebody else, and I couldn't make sense of my own story. I won't mention the artist or the book, but I was writing a lot of those last year. I couldn't understand what was happening in the story myself, like when I saw the magazine 6 months after the script was done. And I had written it, and I don't think the readers had a prayer.
What impels you to write? I don't mean what impels you to write your social realism, your relevancy, because I'm a nihilist, and so, you know, I don't have morality, so it doesn't really touch me as anything of any importance. So just what impels you to want to write?
That's a good question. I suspect that I have a severe personality dislocation somewhere, and that if I didn't write, I'd probably do something destructive with my life. I think that's generally true of people who get into art. The way I define talent is not in any innate capacity to do anything, but a need to do it. A need to do it that's so strong that you eventually get good at it. I suspect that need comes from some inadequacy or some pain that you feel. I know that I had no particular desire to be a writer until I was 21 or 22, but from about age 6, I told stories to the kids on the block. Then I was very heavily into acting for about 5 or 6 years, and in fact, until I got a taste of professional theater and decided I didn't like the life. And then I thought, okay, man, you're not going to be an actor. What's the thing that you can do next best? And I settled upon writing. As a life, you know, that's really fine for an introvert, and that would let me pick the hours and the kind of work that I wanted to do. But there's always been an urge to do some kind of expression. It's the thing I was talking about before, getting beside yourself. When you're an actor, you're impersonating somebody who is not you. When you're a writer, you're doing virtually the same thing, except you may be impersonating a dozen people that aren't you in the course of a story. But, you know, when I'm writing well, when it's going good, I cannot type fast enough. And it ain't Denny O'Neil, who is, you know, 32 years old and gray and has responsibilities. I'm a different person entirely. I suspect that kind of motivation is basic to it. Whether or not I'm going to write or act or be a musician or whatever, there's a need to get outside of yourself for periods. Writing is a fantastic high. When it's going well, there are times when it's 4 in the morning and I can't see the typewriter anymore. But I'm so turned on by what I'm doing that I just want to keep going. But I can't because I'm exhausted. But it can give you that kind of high. And when it's not going that well, well, you know, you got to earn a living some way. When it's not going well, that's why you have to learn craft. That's why you have to learn tricks. I do about 50 pieces of writing a year, and I can't reasonably expect to be enthusiastic about all of them. Because a lot depends on my continued productivity. The food, shelter, and clothing for a number of people, for example. I've got to be able to do it on the days when, you know, there's no desire and there's nothing in the head. That's why you learn craftsmanship.
That's one reason I would not want to really have to write comics for a living, because like what is it, Marvel, they turn out their stories in what, 2.5 days?
Well,
You're right, the written part.
Sure, they do them a hell of a lot faster than that occasionally. I've known Marvel stories be done in 2 hours. when they were pushed against the deadline.
I could never do that. It'd be too little.
I don't allow myself more than 3 days for the average comic book. On a normal work week, I'll go in and see Julie Schwartz on Monday in plot, which at this point nearly is an agreement kind of on what we're going to do a given month. It's a formality at this point. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday I work, doing 8 pages a day. And on Friday I give him the script. There's an economic reason for that. In order to make a living, I have to be that productive, and there's a temperamental reason too. I was trained as a newspaperman, as a journalist, and that's when I really learned to write. Writing against the kind of deadline where at 2 o'clock a man pushes a button and the presses start turning. And there's simply no question of it. You gotta have the story done by 2. So you learn to write fast and accurate and get it right the first time. I knew a guy, Ken Gilmore. Well, you're not from New York, so he did he was the science reporter on the 10 o'clock news, one of the local news programs. And Ken, who's now editor of Popular Science magazine, told me a story about going into his office at 10 o'clock one night with his notes and without his story written. And he went on the air at 10:27, and he knew it. I mean, at 10:27, some announcer was going to say, and now here's our science specialist, Ken Gilmore. And he had 27 minutes to put together his story. And we all said, Ken, that's impossible. You couldn't have done it. He said, yeah, I had to do it, therefore I did. He had to go on camera without his makeup that night, but otherwise he had his story ready to go. 27 minutes. That's the kind of training you get if you're a journalist, if you've worked for newspapers, for radio, or for television. And it's good, it's valuable training for a writer, I think. You get so you're not self-indulgent, and you don't begin to worry about every syllable. You look at the job as a whole, and you're oriented toward getting it done.